Okay, so just getting started here. All right, so today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about, all the things that were from the 80s and the 90s that have changed. So it's the holiday season, and this is the time when so many people, um, start to really reflect on the past and reminisce. And I thought it might be a good time to do that because there's been so many changes. There's a lot of fun stuff that I'm able to remember from the 80s and the 90s. And I thought that people might like to also look back at the 80s and 90s. So, my name is Deborah Heiser. I'm an applied developmental psychologist. I specialize in midlife and aging. I'm the author of The Mentorship Edge, and I was founder of the Mentor Project and the CEO for 8 years. So, um, let's let's start to think about Gen X and all of the things that Gen Xers have gone through. So, um, does anybody remember wearing seatbelts or not wearing seatbelts? Were you a latchkey kid or not? Did you drink from the hose? I know that kids nowadays would never even imagine some of these things or might not even know what those things are. So I invite you to share your birth year or how old you are and to include anything that you might have experienced in your childhood that you remember from the 80s and 90s. So, um, really, the 80s and 90s were a fun time, just like they are now. It's not like it was better then or better now. Um, there were a lot of safety changes that, we didn't have as safe a childhood, I don't think. But, but we all experienced life in the same way in the 80s and the 90s. School was a little bit different. There was no tech. Um, there was real mail. There was sending letters, sending cards. The whole pop culture world was different. We had an internet shift in the late 90s. And prior to that, we didn't have cell phones. If you needed to navigate somewhere, you did it on your own. If you got lost, you didn't have anybody to call. Um, and so it was just a different kind of time. And every now and then I like to look back and remember some of the things that were different because I think that it's really fun to not only remember, the things, the lessons that were learned, but some of the things that were really fun at the time. Even though they might not have been the safest thing at the time, it was a fun time for so many. So I'm hoping that as everybody gets ready for the holidays, that you bring some reminiscing to the table or to the gatherings, whatever you want to reminisce about. Maybe you want to talk about the 90s or the early 2000s, or maybe just a little while back. It doesn't, or maybe your 70s or 60s, depending on the age you are. So just give some thought to it. But I'm going to go back to the 80s and the 90s, and I'm going to give you some of the like hit you with a nostalgia list and see what you have to say. So I remember home life in the 80s, and I remember rotary phones. I don't know if anybody here remembers those, but they're the kind that you dialed like this. And if you got anything wrong, you had to start over again. So I remember dialing, and when you had to do a nine, it was going all the way around. And I don't know about you, but when I used the rotary phone, I often used a pencil. So our phone had a pencil mark in the middle of it where, because you could stick the pencil into the circular part and turn it around a lot easier than you could with a finger. I don't know if anybody else did that. Um, but the other thing was that I remember my sister would always get on the phone and you could hear her sometimes breathing on the other line because you had one phone for the family, and so you could pick up in multiple locations. I even remember some people going to their houses and they would have a rotary phone in their bathroom. And this was kind of funny. I thought that somebody would have a rotary phone in their bathroom. But those rotary phones were how we talked. I remember going into yeah, I would want a private call, and you were never guaranteed a private call because a sibling or somebody else could sneak onto another line in the house. But I would take the phone from the kitchen and drag that long coiled cord all the way to the coat closet that was in the entry hall. And I stretched it as far as it would go. And I would close the door in the coat closet with the phone in the dark and sit there and have, what would be a private phone call. So that was, something that I really remember. Um, and the other thing was you could not, if somebody was on the phone, you couldn't break through. There was a busy signal. And so if you had a teenager in the house, that phone was going to be busy for a long time and just completely busy the whole time. So that was that was just really kind of funny because nowadays you can leave a message or you can do something else to override that. So that was just pretty interesting at the time. So hold on a second. I'm just gonna take care of some stuff here. Okay. So if you have experienced anything like that, if you remember the rotary phone, oh yes, AOL, Stanley, that's so funny. Yes, I remember AOL. You've got mail. Having an email account with AOL, and it actually said you've got mail, which was kind of cool. I don't know. Does anybody still have an AOL account? Do those still exist? You know, I don't even know. I don't even know if you can get an AOL account, but that was life-changing, getting an AOL email account. Um, I also remember, calling a friend's house, and I had to chat with their parents first. Somebody else would always pick up, you never knew who was gonna pick up. And so you'd have a chat with the parents or the sibling or something else, somebody else in the family. And so that was kind of fun. Yeah, or a girlfriend. Absolutely. Um, so you had to really make sure that when you were in, calling somebody that you were cool with talking with whoever was there. I do remember people would prank all the time too. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but the old school kinds of pranks that people would do, which was that they would call a bunch of numbers of people and say ridiculous things into the phone. Yeah, I guess it would be like 6, 7 now. Sure. But that was really a big one back in those days, calling and then slamming the phone down or hanging up and laughing. Um, we didn't have any caller ID. Oh, I didn't know that. I had no idea about that. That's pretty cool. Um, I know that there was no caller ID. You never knew who you were gonna get on the phone. You just answered it. Oh, you were the pranker. That's funny. So, having no caller ID, you never knew who you were gonna get, and so you'd have to answer the phone. And so that was always, it could be stressful. But this is again 80s and 90s nostalgia, remembering these kinds of things. I think I'm going to be excited to, reminisce with family members over the holidays and friends over the holidays, just because it's a lot of fun to remember all of this stuff. So if you have things that you can remember from the 80s or 90s, I remember we had one TV for the family in a main area, and everybody had to fight over what to watch. And it wasn't like there were choices, there were like 4 choices. But if somebody was watching the news, then everybody else was like kind of bummed. And so everyone would gather around the one television, and there was no remote. So somebody had to get up and go change the channel. So you'd have like 4 channels and somebody would go change it. Hey, Nellie, good to see you here. So that was really, I can't believe how far we've come. Um, and oh yeah, there was star 69, which was a way to redial. That was kind of cool. And oh, I don't know if anybody did this. Did anybody have no Nintendo? And to get the Nintendo cartridges to work, you'd have to like blow into them, I guess, to get it to work. So that was kind of funny having that, the Nintendos. Yeah, that was just a classic. I forgot all about that. Oh, and VHS tapes. I remember having to rewind them before you took them back. If anybody doesn't remember what a VHS tape was, that was how you got your movies. You'd go and take out a movie from somewhere, and the worst thing would be if you got a movie and you had to rewind it because somebody didn't rewind it. So when you took out your movie, you'd go someplace like Blockbuster, take out your movie, bring it home, and at the end of it, you'd have to rewind it before you put it in a big case, and then you took it back to Blockbuster. But you'd go through, it was like a library, and go through the whole store, up and down the aisles, looking for the video. And I remember like 9 times out of 10, I would get there and all of the videos that I wanted were taken out. So you'd have one cover, and then behind it would be a couple of tapes. And if you went there and looked behind that cover, you might not find a tape, and that meant it had been taken out. And they'd have signs like "Be kind, rewind" all over the store, so that reminded people to remind them. Yeah, you'd get charged. You're right. I remember that being such an issue with taking them back. Um, who here had mixtapes? I remember making mixtapes, and they would do things like, hold on a second. There we go. So I remember having mixtapes, and all of my friends would have mixtapes, and we would be making them off of the radio. So you'd hear the radio announcements and the commercials and whatever, or you wouldn't get to it in time to press record. So the very beginning of the song wouldn't be on there. But we would make these mixtapes, and if anybody remembers having the mixtapes, you'd have to put a pencil in it to rewind it sometimes because it would get stuck, or you'd pull it out and it would have the tape that would be stuck inside the boom box that you had or inside the car. So that was kind of funny to do that. But I remember all the mixtapes had all of the radio station stuff in there. But that's what we would take to the beach, or when you went out, you'd take a boom box and have that, and you'd have to rewind it all the time. And having Walkmans, I don't know if anybody had a Walkman, or Discmans, and how that was, you could actually, they had the foam on the ears, so that when you had the headphones on, the ears would actually have the little foam on the outside. That was kind of fun to have that. But that was a way to walk around with your tape, your cassette tape, and you could listen to your music wherever you were. It was the first time being able to do that. I remember televisions being so huge. They were enormous. They took up like an incredible amount of space, and they were really thick. They had to sit on a piece of furniture because they were so big. And so that was another part of it. I mean, our TVs have changed so much since then. Oh, and VCR clocks. Did anybody have a VCR clock that always like blinked a number? And if you had any kind of a power outage or anything and you didn't change the time on it, would just blink 12 o'clock forever. That was another thing I remember. The other thing was that there were only a few TV channels, but they went off late at night. I remember being a babysitter and I would be up late babysitting and the television shows would go off and it would just be fuzz, like the black and white kind of fuzz that was there. And there would be nothing on. And it would even make a noise like, "Rrr." And that was the way it was. You just didn't have TV 24 hours a day. Um, and you got the TV listings from a TV guide or the newspaper, but people bought an actual TV guide and it would give you the guide for the whole week. So you knew when you could go on and find the show that you wanted. And it would give a description about what the show was about. And all of this was available to anybody who wanted to check that out. So, aluminum foil on the antenna of the television. That was another thing, and moving them to get better reception. So having that, could make it 1 minute, it's fine. And then you have to go send somebody to go fix it, move it around. I remember this really well. I ate cereal pretty much every morning and reading the cereal boxes at breakfast because there wasn't anything else to do. It was kind of like when you see people nowadays looking at their phones while they're eating. We did that in the morning. We would read the back and the side and the front. Every single part of the cereal box was read every day. And it didn't matter what was on there. That was what we did. We read the cereal boxes. And I don't even remember what they said. Speaking of reading encyclopedias, we had an entire encyclopedia set, and that was our Google. So you would go and you'd have to search through the index to find something that you were going to use for your book report. And there were different encyclopedia sets. So you might go and use a friend's encyclopedia set. If you didn't have the, latest encyclopedia set, you would use encyclopedias at the library, but that's how we did our work, was using encyclopedias, which was essentially a handwritten version of the internet. But they'd get updated all the time. So if you had a full set of encyclopedias, every year you would get a book with all the updates. And then you'd put that at the end of your encyclopedia list on your bookshelf. Typewriters, I took typing lessons. And I actually went to somebody's house to take lessons and then had to practice. I took a typing class in high school. And that was, an expected thing to do, that you took typing lessons. I remember our very first computer in the house. It was an Apple and it was beige and it had a tiny black screen and it was all attached. And, using it was not like using it now. It had a big floppy kind of disk that you could use with it. And we had dot matrix printers with perforated edges that you tore off the sides, and it would get jammed, and it would just kind of one sheet after another would come and go up. But if you did something like somebody stepped, in the path of that, you could end up having a problem with that getting printed. It was not an easy way to print. And then you'd have to tear off the sides and then put the papers together, so it didn't just come out in order. Riding in cars with no seat belts. That was a big thing. There were no seat belts when I was learning to drive, and then seat belts were added in the 80s. And then, it took people a little bit of time to adjust to using seat belts. But they just had lap belts for a while. Sitting in the way back of a station wagon facing traffic that was oncoming. That was another one. I remember all sorts of times sitting in the way back of somebody's station wagon. There'd be 7 kids in the car and a mom or a dad was driving all the kids somewhere, and you'd be sitting in the way back of the station wagon all jammed up with a bunch of kids. Um, oh, and another one was riding in the open bed of pickup trucks. That was another thing. That was what everybody would do. We never had helmets when we went bike riding, or skateboarding, and there were no pads. If you fell, you fell, but there were no helmets either. And no helmets also if you did like dirt bike riding and things like that, or you didn't have to. We also would play outside all day, so it was very normal for everybody to just be outside, and you had to come home for dinner. So, at a certain time, you'd know either the streetlights came on or, um, you would know the dinner time based on the light in the sky, and then everybody would go home, or you'd hear somebody yell out to come home. But that was a pretty common thing, was to just play outside without having any supervision or anything. The latchkey kids were that was totally 80s, having latchkey kids. Where I remember being a kid and all the kids that were latchkey kids would have these really cool keychains, that had all kinds of things on them, plus their key to get in their house. But that was something that kids did. They would go and let themselves in, because their parents were working, um, and that was how it was done. So it was coming home to an empty house and making your own snack, and then going outside and doing whatever you were going to do. Um, Roaming the neighborhood on bikes, and your parents could not get in touch with you, and you couldn't get in touch with them. Oh, this one, I remember this. Playgrounds with the hot metal slides. I don't know if anybody remembers the hot metal slides in the playgrounds, but you'd get on those slides and go down them, and it was just roastingly hot. So you never wanted to be the first one to go down a metal slide because it was just so hot. You'd get like a burn. Um, and then it went right into asphalt or gravel. It didn't usually end in grass or anything like that. Trampolines didn't have nets. I remember those flying off of trampolines. And they had exposed strings, the springs. It had exposed springs. I do remember drinking from a garden hose when I was really little. I think that was the 70s. But I remember drinking from a garden hose, and people didn't think that was at all bizarre. And that was just something that people did. You didn't go in and ask for a glass of water. You just went to the hose of your friend's house, and your friend would let you, just get a drink. We also didn't have sunscreen. That was so bizarre to me that we played out all day long, but there was no sunscreen. I do remember getting sunburned, but not like I do today, but maybe I just don't remember it. Oh, I do remember in the 80s, though, getting really, really sunburned. And, everybody would put all kinds of stuff on. We didn't put like aloe on like we would do that now. We'd put like creams on, all kinds of stuff. We always took a brown paper bag to make a book cover. That was what all of our book covers were made of. I know that some people bought theirs and had fancy ones, but I had a brown paper bag book cover, and I loved those because we could draw all over them. My dad was an artist, so he always made really cool book covers for me. Um, Passing handwritten notes in class. That was something, making sure you weren't getting noticed by the teacher. Overhead projectors and the markers and the clear sheets that were used. Film strip projectors that were used, and all of the beeping to advance the slides. Those were all, so commonly used. And then, the TV cart that got rolled into class. So during holiday weeks and, if there was some kind of a special day, you'd have the TV cart that would get rolled into class, and that was what was used for movie day. Um, oh, I remember the chalkboards and how the erasers would get clapped to get rid of all the, dust in them so that you could have a cleaner chalkboard. Um, And I remember the special binders. I did not have one of these, but a lot of kids had the Trapper Keeper binders and they had like a Velcro flap. I didn't have those. I had a regular one. And I remember my binder, all the papers would always fall out of it because I had like a crappy cheap one. And so like, somehow those binder clips would get messed up somehow and all the papers would fly all over the place. And all the like the cool kids with those Trapper Keepers did not have that problem. Um, so I remember those. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but going to the mall and spending hours at the mall, just being dropped off at the mall and spending all day at the mall. We didn't have a phone, there was nobody there. It was just basically the malls were just, packs of kids walking around the mall, having been dropped off, no phone to get in touch with anybody, and being told to meet at a specific entrance at a certain time so that you could get picked up. Um, and that was just how we would spend our time. There were arcades back then also where you could go, and it wasn't just to play the video games, it was kind of like a social hub. You'd get like beverages like, soda or get a piece of pizza or something like that, and watch each other play Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man and stuff like that. Um, Hanging out in parking lots. I don't know what the deal was with that, but that was something that we did. Sleepovers with rented movies and playing Truth or Dare, calling radio stations to request songs or to give shout outs, all of those sorts of things. Um, Polaroid pictures, taking those, that was a common one that we did, was to take Polaroid pictures. Having disposable cameras, if you're going on a trip, getting those, making sure you had one of those, and then having to take it to a store to get it developed. And then I remember everybody who worked there looked at everybody's pictures. So everybody knew everybody's business because whoever was working at the film development store was able to look at everybody's pictures as they were being developed. And some of the photo developing stores had a little like a conveyor belt kind of a thing. And so when it would get developed, it would slide down, and then people on the outside could look in a window and look at everybody's pictures. So I remember there was not a lot of privacy. But you also had to wait a while, like days or a week to get your pictures. And that was just a thrill because you didn't know if they were going to be any good or not. You had no idea what was going to be there because you would really hope to take a great picture, but somebody could move and it would be blurry, or you might move and it would be blurry. So pictures were a bigger deal then. Saturday morning cartoons, just laying around, and they would be on until like noon. So parents sleeping in and just laying in on a Saturday morning on the floor in front of the television watching endless cartoons. And I remember rushing home or, meeting up with people to watch a TV show because there was no streaming. If you missed it, you missed it. It was on, and you wanted to make sure to get back in time to see your favorite show. MTV played music videos all day. That's all that MTV was. I remember being an MTV junkie. I loved MTV. It was a great, like, we would just lay around and watch MTV. That was like the brain rot of the day, like people scrolling on social media. It was really, we were just watching MTV. Let's see, what else do I remember? I remember all the chores that we did growing up. I think people still do chores, but I just remember that being a big part of everybody's life was doing chores, and not being able to go out until chores were done. We all had address books and Rolodexes. Like you would have an actual book with everybody's address in it, like physical address and their phone number. And that was because everybody sent cards to people. So everybody would go to the address book around holiday time, get everybody's addresses, and they'd write their cards. And that was also where you would get the phone numbers for people. I know that in our house, we had like a piece of paper next to the phone in the kitchen that was like on the wall so you could get all of the top numbers from people that you would call frequently. But we all memorized everybody's phone numbers. I remember memorized like so many people's phone numbers. I could I countless phone numbers because we had to. Um, and fridge doors were covered in magnets, menus, notes, everything. It was kind of like a desktop computer was what the fridge was like. Um, and everybody had box fans. I don't know if everybody else remembers this, but the box fan, this big box fan, they still have them. But we would make big forts out of those. So you'd put like a big flat sheet or blanket over a box fan and then put that over furniture. And then you'd have like a fort that would be made by the fan blowing into it. That was a lot of fun. We used to spend a lot of time doing that on sleepovers and things like that. Um, Having car games when you take long trips, going to visit family for holidays, because there wasn't anything else to do in the car. So you do things like read out license plates, find license plates from other states or something like that so that you could make a game of it so people wouldn't get bored in the car. And paper maps that were kept in the glove compartment of the car. I remember never being able to fold those right to put it back. It was like a big wad that was just put back in the glove compartment so that if you open the glove compartment, it would like pop out. And that was how we would navigate because there was no GPS. So you'd have to look at the roads and the main roads and find the smaller roads and look at that. And if you were driving and you didn't have somebody in the passenger seat navigating for you, it was not easy. You'd have to memorize everything and then pull over and look again to find out where you were going. And I remember the big deal it was to have calendars. So we all had calendars that were, we would look forward to getting a calendar at the end of the year to start the new year with a brand new calendar that would have, maybe you liked puppies or kittens or whatever, or it would have, some of the teen idols of the time that were on it. Those were a big, big, big deal. We don't have those really anymore. I haven't seen those in forever. But that was a big deal. There were so many things that, the 80s and 90s had that like Tang and Kool-Aid. I drank so much Kool-Aid. I didn't even know that there was another beverage. Car ashtrays and lighters and ashtrays in people's houses. Smoking sections on airplanes, smoking sections in restaurants. I remember going to work and everyone smoked at work. I remember going to the doctor office in the 70s and my doctor smoked in the doctor office, my pediatrician. There were all of these crazy things that, were just reminiscent of the times. So anyway, I hope that everybody has a really great holiday and that you make reminiscing part of it, whatever age you were when you were growing up, but remembering that and sharing that with others, because that's such a good thing to do when you are getting together with other people and maybe you want to stay on some safe topics. You don't want to get into any kind of topics that get anybody upset. That's something that you can do is to reminisce. And so People often also like to hear about what it was like in your generation to grow up and to experience things. It can be interesting for them to think of what life would be like if they didn't have GPS in the car, or what it would be like to, live before microwaves or before cell phones, or, when AOL was the first, way that you got your email. So if you are going to spend time this holiday season with people, I hope that you'll take a little time to reminisce about whatever it is that you want to remember. But I hope to see you again tomorrow at between 3 or 4, and have a great holiday if I don't.